At 17, I brought home the championship trophy, but the house was empty. My dad's note was cold. "You'll be fine on your own." But it was my brother's words on the phone that killed me. "Mom and Dad have a new plan. You're not in it." They had no idea that betrayal would create a millionaire. And my name is Madison Carter, and I am 30 years old now. My story, the one that truly defines me, doesn't start with a beginning. It starts with an ending. The end of a childhood I thought I had. The end of a family I thought I belonged to. It happened when I was 17, on a day that should have been a victory. And it all began with a cheap plastic trophy. The old yellow school bus groaned as it rumbled down the familiar streets of my small Ohio town. Each bump in the road a little jolt to the reality I was holding in my lap. It was a trophy, not a grand, heavy thing of real metal, but a tall, gleaming column of fake gold plastic on a cheap marble base. To anyone else, it was worthless. To me, it was everything. My fingers were wrapped so tightly around its base that my knuckles were white. This was it. The state debate championship proof. Hung through the grimy window, the world outside was a slideshow of American suburbia. Neat wooden houses with porches, manicured lawns, just starting to need their weekly cut. And the giant oak tree on the corner of my street, its leaves turning the first shades of autumn gold. For the entire 2-hour ride home, I had been playing a movie in my head. I'd walk through the door, hold this trophy up, and for the first time I would see it. A real, genuine smile from my mother, not the tight, polite one she saved for neighbors. I could almost feel my father's heavy hand on my shoulder, giving it a quick, awkward squeeze that in his language was a roar of approval. This time it would be different. This time I would be enough. The bus hissed to a stop at my corner. As I stepped down onto the cracked sidewalk, the bus pulled away with a diesel-scented sigh, leaving me in a sudden, unnerving silence. And that's when the first wrong note played in the symphony of my homecoming. The front lawn was just a little too high, the edges looking shaggy and neglected, a flicker of unease. Then I saw the living room window, the floral curtains my mother had spent a month picking out. They were gone, just a dark, empty square staring back at me. And my heart began a low, anxious thrum against my ribs. I walked faster, my sneakers crunching on the gravel driveway. It was empty. Dad's Ford F-150 wasn't there. Mom's SUV wasn't there. Maybe they went out for a celebration dinner. A desperate little voice in my head whispered, "They're going to surprise you." But the excuse felt thin, fragile. An icy finger traced its way down my spine. The front door was never, ever left unlocked. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and turned the knob. It gave way without resistance, swinging inward on silent hinges. And the smell hit me first, not the familiar scent of Mom's pot roast or the faint, clean smell of laundry detergent. It was the sharp, chemical odor of bleach and pine sol, so strong it made my eyes water. It was the smell of erasure. My gaze swept across the living room, and my breath caught in my throat. It was empty. The sofa was gone. The coffee table was gone. The television was gone. But the worst part, the part that made a strangled sound escape my lips, was the wall. Faded, brighter rectangles of paint marked the spaces where our family photos used to hang, ghosts of a life that had been there that morning. And I walked numbly into the kitchen, the trophy still clutched in my hand like a shield. There, on the center of the clean, empty countertop, was a single sheet of white paper. My father's blocky, utilitarian handwriting filled the page. It wasn't a letter. It was a statement. Madison, we've run into some trouble. We had to make a clean break. You're smart, you're strong, you'll be fine on your own. No love, no sorry, just a dismissal. My world tilted. It couldn't be real. There had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. My fumbling fingers pulled my phone from my pocket, the trophy now wedged uncomfortably under my arm. I scrolled to my brother's name. Ryan, he would explain. He had to. The phone rang twice before he picked up. I could hear the tinny sound of a TV and laughter in the background. Maddie? He asked, his voice flat, annoyed. Sin Ryan, what's going on? Where is everyone? The house. It's empty, I sobbed, the words tearing at my throat. There was a pause, a heavy sigh on his end of the line. Listen, Maddie, he said, his tone devoid of any emotion. Mom and Dad said this was the only way to start over. Dad lost his job. The bank was about to take the house. This was their new plan. Hinin, their new plan? I whispered, confusion and horror churning in my stomach. What about me? And his next words were the final, killing blow. They were delivered with a cold, simple practicality that shattered me more than any screaming match ever could. You're not in it, he said. Look, you're the smart one. You get scholarships, you have a future. I don't. You can take care of yourself. I need them, it's that simple. In Ryan, no. In just, don't call again, Maddie. The line went dead. The click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood there in the echoing silence of the stripped bare house, the smell of bleach burning my nostrils. My brother's words ricocheted in my skull. You're not in it. My fingers, numb and useless, went slack. The trophy slipped. It fell through the air in slow motion before hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp, hollow crack. It didn't bounce. It shattered, exploding into a dozen jagged pieces of fake gold plastic that skittered across the empty room, coming to rest in the dust where our lives used to be. In that first night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even cry after that initial shattering sob. A profound numbness settled deep in my bones, a cold so complete it felt like a physical presence in the empty house. The moon cast long, pale rectangles of light onto the floor, illuminating the scattered pieces of my broken trophy. Each shard seemed to catch the light and glint, like a tiny, malevolent eye. I sat on the cold hardwood floor, my back against the wall, and let the memories come. I finally understood that what happened today wasn't a sudden storm. It was the hurricane that had been gathering force just over the horizon for my entire life. My gaze drifted across the bare floorboards and a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. I was 14, and my entire summer had smelled of waffle cones and stale mop water. I'd worked 60-hour weeks at the local ice cream parlor, scooping mint chip for sticky-fingered kids, all for one goal, a bicycle. I'd found a used 10-speed, a little rusty but with good bones. The day I wheeled it home, my pride was a warm, glowing thing in my chest. That same week, my parents bought Ryan, who was 12, a brand new mountain bike with shock absorbers and 21 gears. His old one was perfectly fine. He needs the exercise, my father had said with a shrug. When I asked my mother why they'd bought it for him when I'd had to work for mine, she waved her hand dismissively, not even looking up from her magazine. You're older, Madison. It's good for you to learn to be independent. The lesson was clear. My effort was expected, while his mere existence was rewarded. A phantom smell of roasted turkey and simmering resentment filled the air, and I was suddenly at our Thanksgiving dinner table from the year before. The whole extended family was there, Flushed with excitement, I'd announced I'd made the varsity debate team as a junior. My aunt offered a polite congratulations, but my father just let out a long, weary sigh. "Debate? What are you going to do with that? Become a lawyer and argue for a living?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He gestured with his fork toward my brother, who was busy trying to discreetly use his phone under the table. "Why can't you study something practical? Ryan here is already looking into business courses." My brother glanced up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, Maddie," he'd snickered. "Let's see if your big mouth can pay the rent someday." The laughter around the table felt like tiny, stinging needles. I'd shrunk in my chair, my moment of pride, shriveling into a hot ball of shame in my stomach. And my mother, Brenda, had her own special brand of poison. It was the poison of comparison. Her friends' daughters were always the gold standard I could never meet. "Did you see the apple pie Sarah Miller brought over?" she'd say, while I was reading a book at the kitchen table. It was absolutely divine. She learned from her grandmother. The unspoken part hung in the air. And what do? Just stick your nose in books. It didn't matter that I got straight A's, that I won academic awards. In her eyes, I was failing at the only subject that counted: being a proper, traditional girl. I wasn't learning to bake or dance or make a home. I was learning to think. And to her, that was a liability. And the final memory was the ugliest, the one that tasted like betrayal. It felt like a dress rehearsal for today. I was 16 and checking the balance of my college fund, a small account my grandparents had started for me, that I'd been diligently adding to with every penny I saved. It was half empty. When I confronted my parents, their faces were a mask of strained patience. Ryan had gotten into some trouble with a credit card, maxing it out on video games and designer sneakers. They'd used my money to bail him out. "It was an emergency, Madison," my father had said, his voice firm, daring me to argue. "We'll pay you back, of course." But they never did. My future had been sacrificed to pay for his recklessness. My dreams were collateral damage in the lifelong project of propping up their golden boy. Anna sitting there, in the dark, the fragments of the past clicked into place, forming a bleak and undeniable map of my own insignificance. The empty house wasn't a punishment. It was a logical conclusion. I was the responsible one, the smart one. I was the one who could take care of herself. I had been so busy proving my strength to them, I hadn't realized I was just making it easier for them to leave. Then the moonlight had shifted, and the shattered pieces of the trophy no longer glinted. They were just dull, cheap plastic on a cold floor. I looked into the suffocating darkness of the hallway, a void that mirrored the one that had just opened up inside of me. A single terrifying question echoed in the silence. And if my own family didn't want me, who in the world ever would? The question I'd asked the darkness, who in the world would ever want me, hung in the silent house all night. It followed me the next morning as I walked to school like a ghost, the bright autumn sun feeling like an accusation. My eyes were swollen and gritty from a night without sleep. Each cheerful hello from a classmate in the hallway felt like a physical blow. I couldn't face them. I couldn't face the questions. Instead of turning toward my homeroom, my feet carried me on autopilot down a different hall, to a door with a small brass plaque. "Mrs. Davis, Guidance Counselor." And I hesitated for a full minute, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat, like proving my parents right, that I couldn't handle it on my own. But the alternative, returning to that hollowed-out house, was infinitely more terrifying. I knocked. Said Mrs. Davis was a kind-faced woman with laugh lines around her eyes and a halo of silver hair. She was close to retirement, and she had the calm, unshockable demeanor of someone who had seen it all. She took one look at my face and simply gestured to the worn armchair opposite her desk. I sat, and the story tumbled out of me in a messy, hiccuping torrent of words. The trophy, the empty house, the note, the phone call with Ryan. I expected pity, or worse, disbelief. Instead, she just listened, her expression never changing. When I was finished, a wreck of shuddering breaths, she quietly got up, went to a small machine in the corner, and came back with a steaming mug. It was hot chocolate. She placed it in my trembling hands and looked me straight in the eye. "And you are not alone in this, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but firm. The simple, unconditional kindness of it, the warmth of the mug, the steadiness of her gaze, was so unexpected it almost broke me all over again. It was a simple act my own mother had never once thought to offer. And Mrs. Davis made a phone call. "I need you to come down to my office, Sarah," she said into the receiver. "It's about Madison Carter." A few minutes later, the door opened and in walked Mrs. Peterson, my debate coach. She was the opposite of Mrs. Davis, sharp, energetic, and fiercely protective of her students. She saw my state, listened as Mrs. Davis gave her the short, brutal version of the story, and her face hardened. A flash of pure, undiluted rage crossed her features. It wasn't pity, it was fury, and it was on my behalf. "Those bastards," she said, her voice low and tight with anger. "Those absolute bastards don't deserve a daughter like you." Hearing someone else say it, hearing them validate the anger I was too numb to feel, was like a release valve opening in my chest. "You are not going back to that house," she declared, not asking, but stating a fact. "You're coming home with me. My boys can share a room for a while." In and I was too stunned to argue. That evening, I walked into a home that was the complete opposite of the one I'd left. It was small, a little cluttered, and filled with life. It smelled of cinnamon and baking apples. Her husband, a quiet man named George, just nodded and gave me a gentle smile. Her 2 teenage sons grumbled good-naturedly about sharing a room, but then immediately started arguing about who would win the upcoming football game, treating me not as an intruder, but as a temporary normal part of their chaotic family life. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt the ice around my heart begin to thaw, just a little. The next day, Mrs. Davis made another call. She had a friend, a lawyer in town named Richard Ellis. He agreed to see me that afternoon, free of charge. I sat in his quiet, book-lined office, feeling small and out of place. I laid out the evidence on his polished desk, the cruel note from my father, and the call log on my phone, showing this single, devastating call from Ryan. Mr. Ellis read the note, his brow furrowed. He listened to my account of the phone call, his expression growing more grim with every word. And when I was done, he leaned back in his leather chair and looked at me, not as a child, but as a client. "Madison," he said, his voice calm and serious, "what your parents did is called abandonment. It's illegal and it's morally reprehensible." He then explained a legal process I'd never heard of, emancipation of a minor. It would mean the court would legally declare me an adult, giving me control over my own life, my own finances, my own future. "And I'll take your case," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that gave me a flicker of strength. "And I'll do it pro bono. What they did was wrong." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Justice needs to be served." On leaving his office, I felt a shift inside me, The desperate, terrified question from the night before was still there, but now it had a companion. It was the first fragile seed of a new resolve. I was no longer just a victim. I was about to become a survivor. The court officially declared me an adult a few weeks before my 18th birthday. That piece of paper was my Declaration of Independence, but it was also my enlistment notice for a war I had to fight alone. College was my only path forward, my only escape route. And so, my new life began on move-in day, a day that perfectly illustrated my new reality. In the campus was a vibrant, chaotic swarm of life. Minivans and SUVs were double parked, overflowing with mini fridges, posters, and milk crates full of belongings. Fathers, sweating and grumbling good-naturedly, hauled overloaded boxes up flights of stairs. Mothers fussed over bedsheets and arranged photos on desks. The air was thick with laughter, excited shouts, and the tearful, clinging hugs of families saying goodbye. And then there was me. I dragged my single, scuffed suitcase across the quad, my knuckles white on the handle. It contained everything I owned in the world. I found my dorm room, unlocked the door, and pushed it inside. I didn't unpack. I just closed the door, shutting out the symphony of family outside, and leaned against the cool wood, the silence of my empty room a deafening roar. In that moment, the weight of my solitude was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest until it was hard to breathe. My life quickly fell into a relentless, exhausting rhythm. It was a ledger of hours worked versus hours slept. Day was for lectures, night was for survival. I was a computer science major, and my days were a blur of algorithms, data structures, and logic gates. But when other students went to study groups or parties, my second shift began. From 6 p.m. to midnight, I worked the help desk at the campus computer lab, the quiet hum of the servers a constant companion. From midnight to 2 a.m., I walked 10 blocks to a 24-hour diner where I refilled coffee cups and wiped down greasy tables for tips. I built a small empire on a foundation of instant ramen noodles. My diet consisted of whatever was cheapest, packets of ramen, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches I'd make in my room, and the free burnt coffee I could drink on my breaks at the diner. I became a ghost haunting the campus, fueled by caffeine and sheer stubborn will. I was running on fumes, but I was running. But a body can only take so much, and a mind can take even less. The trauma began to claw its way out in the dark. I developed a crippling insomnia, my mind racing for hours, replaying every betrayal. Then came the panic attacks. They would strike without warning, in the middle of a lecture, or while I was trying to sleep. My heart would hammer against my ribs, my breath would shorten, and a cold dread would wash over me, the certainty that I was utterly and completely alone and would never escape it. And after one particularly bad night, I found myself standing outside the campus counseling center. Taking that step, admitting I couldn't just power through it, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, gave me the words I so desperately needed. During one session, as I spoke of my deep-seated feeling of worthlessness, she held up a hand. "Madison," she said gently, "their actions are a reflection of who they are, not a measure of what you are worth." That sentence became my mantra. I wrote it on a sticky note and put it on my mirror. I whispered it to myself when the panic rose in my chest. Their actions define them, not you. And slowly, painstakingly, I started to rebuild. I channeled all my fear and anger and loneliness into my work. I didn't just study, I devoured my coursework. I didn't just code, I built elegant, complex systems in my mind. 4 years of that brutal, relentless grind passed in a blur. I walked across the graduation stage as the class valedictorian, my academic robe hiding the worn-out diner uniform I'd have to put on in a few hours. But the real victory came a month later. I'd poured everything I had into a project for a national collegiate coding competition. The night the results were announced, I was sitting in my tiny post-graduation apartment, eating ramen. An email popped up. I had won. The prize wasn't a fortune, just $5,000. But as I stared at the screen, tears blurring the words, I knew it was the most valuable money I would ever see. It wasn't just cash, it was proof. It was the first brick laid in an empire of my own making. It was a beginning. And for 13 years, the past was a sealed tomb. I had built a new life, a new identity, on the ashes of the old one. I was no longer Maddie, the abandoned girl. I was Madison Carter, CEO of Phoenix Innovations, a tech company I had built from the ground up with the $5,000 from that long-ago coding competition. My world was one of clean lines, logical systems, and controlled outcomes. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, a ghost slipped through the firewall. In it appeared as a notification on my screen, a Facebook message. The name was unfamiliar, but the profile picture was a punch to the gut. It was Ryan, older, a little heavier, but with the same smug set to his jaw. My first instinct was to delete it, to block him, to reinforce the walls. But I was a CEO now. I didn't react. I analyzed. I opened the message. Hey Maddie, it read. Saw you in that Forbes article. 30 under 30. Wow, so proud of you. My stomach tightened. He didn't call me Maddie. He called me Maddie when he wanted something. Below the text was a picture. Ryan, a tired-looking woman, and 2 small children, a boy and a girl, smiling awkwardly for the camera. My nephew and niece, strangers. This wasn't an olive branch. This was a probe, a test to see if the line was still active. And I did what any good CEO would do before a high-stakes negotiation. I consulted my board, in this case my therapist, Dr. Sharma, whom I still saw twice a month. What do you want to happen? She asked. I want to know their angle, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. Then meet him, she advised. On your terms, in a neutral space. Listen more than you talk. Information is power, Madison. And so I agreed. We met at a sterile, noisy Starbucks downtown. He looked worn, the ghost of his youthful arrogance, now replaced by a kind of weary desperation. He launched into a well-rehearsed monologue about his tough life, the factory job he'd lost, how hard it was with 2 kids. And then came the carefully placed mentions of our parents. They're getting older, you know, he said, stirring his latte with a plastic stick. They talk about you. They regret so much. I just nodded, my face a neutral mask. He never once asked about the 13 years I'd been gone. Not about college or the diner or the panic attacks. The conversation was a one-way street, leading directly to his final manipulative pitch. The kids, he said, trying to make his eyes look misty. They ask about their aunt all the time. They'd love to meet you. And then a few weeks later, the reconnaissance mission escalated into a full-scale invasion. Ryan called, his voice bright with false cheer. Surprise! We took a leap of faith. We all moved to the city. Mom and Dad figured it was time we were all together as a family again. Before I could even process the violation, he added, We're actually just downtown. Thought we'd stop by and see your office. And they didn't wait for an invitation. 20 minutes later, the front desk called me, my assistant's voice tight with confusion. Miss Carter, there's a family here to see you. I walked out to the lobby, my sanctuary of polished concrete and smoked glass, to find them standing there like a bad dream. And then my mother, Brenda, saw me. She let out a theatrical cry and rushed forward, throwing her arms around me. It wasn't a hug, it was a performance for the benefit of my employees. "Oh, Madison, my baby," she wailed, her tears conveniently timed. "I know I was wrong. I've lived with that mistake every single day. Please, just give me a chance to earn back your love." In that night, I found myself sitting at a dinner table with the 3 people who had thrown me away. The restaurant was upscale, the conversation stilted. They tried to dredge up pleasant memories I didn't have, their voices filled with a cloying false nostalgia. I deflected with polite, non-committal answers, my mind cold and clear. I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. In it dropped after the main course. My father, Frank, who had been mostly silent, cleared his throat. He looked around the expensive restaurant, then at me, the daughter he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. His eyes weren't filled with regret. They were filled with calculation. "Hen, you've done very well for yourself, Madison. We're very impressed," he began, his tone attempting a fatherly warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "The thing is, your mother and we don't have an income anymore. Her health isn't what it used to be." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air before delivering the final, perfectly aimed strike. "We were thinking, now that you're in a position to help, perhaps a small monthly allowance? Just to help with living costs, medical expenses. It's what a good daughter would do." And there it was. The mask was gone. I wasn't their daughter. I was a business opportunity, a walking, talking ATM. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, at all of them. And for the first time, I saw them not as the family who had broken my heart, but as creditors, presenting me with an invoice for their own failures. And in that chilling silence, I knew the time for defense was over. Then my response to my father's request for a monthly allowance was polite, professional, and final. I delivered it via text message the next day. "After careful consideration, I will not be providing financial support. I wish you the best." It was a cold corporate refusal. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. It was the beginning of the war. And the retaliation came that Friday. It was 4:55 p.m., the time when the office energy shifts from productive hum to weekend anticipation. My assistant's voice on the intercom was strained, bordering on panic. "Miss Carter, your mother is in the lobby. She's causing a scene." And I strode out of my office, and the sight that greeted me sent a shockwave of cold fury through my veins. There, in the middle of my sleek, minimalist lobby, was Brenda. She had collapsed onto one of the designer leather couches, sobbing hysterically. A small crowd of my employees had gathered, their faces a mixture of confusion and awkward sympathy. "Han, after everything I did for her," Brenda wailed to anyone who would listen, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "I sacrificed so she could have a good life, and now that she's a millionaire, she won't even help her poor sick mother. She's leaving us to die." This was not my home. This was not a family argument. This was Phoenix Innovations. This was the sanctuary I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears, and she was defiling it. So my professionalism shattered. I marched over, my heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. I grabbed her by the arm, my grip like iron. "Get up," I hissed, my voice a low, dangerous growl. "Now." Anne and I dragged her into the nearest glass-walled conference room and slammed the door shut. The moment the door clicked, the transformation was instantaneous and horrifying. The heaving sobs stopped. The tears vanished. Her face, which had been a mask of tragic motherhood, twisted into a snarl of pure venom. "In who the hell do you think you are?" she spat, her voice dripping with a lifetime of resentment. "You think you're better than us now with your fancy office and your important little job?" She advanced on me, her finger jabbing at the air. "Everything you have is because of the upbringing I and your father gave you, and this is how you repay us? By throwing us away like trash, you ungrateful animal?" My phone buzzed in my hand. The screen lit up with a single name, Ryan, a coordinated attack, a pincer movement. My thumbs swiped to answer, a cold dread mixing with the white-hot rage in my chest. I put it on speaker. "And what do you want, Ryan?" I asked, my voice flat. "Ian, I'm just calling to talk some sense into you," he began, his tone oozing with condescending reason. "Mom is just trying to do what's best for the family. Why are you making this so difficult, Maddie? It's a little bit of money to you. What's the big deal? Or do you want the whole world to know what kind of heartless, ungrateful daughter you really are?" And that was it. That was the line. The final, absolute, unforgivable line. The accusation of being ikakuk ungrateful from the two people who had stripped me of everything, who had abandoned me without a second thought. The sheer, breathtaking hypocrisy of it all. It was the drop of poison that made the whole glass overflow. Something inside me broke. Or maybe something was finally forged. The years of pain, of being invisible, of swallowing my anger. It all coalesced into a single point of cold, diamond-hard clarity. And I looked at my mother's sneering face. I listened to my brother's threatening voice on the phone. And I calmly pressed the end call button. And the silence in the conference room was absolute. My mother stared at me, her mouth still open, surprised by my sudden action. I met her gaze, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the scared, needy child. I was the one in control. My voice, when it came out, was not loud. It was quiet, it was steady, and it was as cold as the grave. "And you were right about one thing, Brenda," I said, using her first name for the very first time. "I won't make things more difficult." And I took a step forward, and she instinctively took a step back. "Edie, I'm going to end it," I said, "once and for all." And after my mother left my office, the rage didn't cool. It solidified. The wild, chaotic fire of emotion transformed into the cold, clean, focused energy of a laser beam. The days of reacting were over. The time for passivity was done. It was time to act. Sat back in the sanctuary of my office, I closed the door, the sound of it clicking shut a definitive end to one phase of my life and the beginning of another. I walked to my desk, my movements deliberate, and made my first strategic move. I didn't call my therapist for comfort. I called my past for ammunition. I opened my laptop and searched for the law firm of Richard Ellis. He was no longer a small-town lawyer. He was a named partner at a prestigious firm in the city. His face serious and confident in his professional headshot. I dialed the number. And when his secretary put me through, his voice was older, deeper, but instantly recognizable. "Madison Carter," he said, a note of carefully controlled surprise in his voice. "It's been a very long time." And I didn't waste time on pleasantries. The CEO in me took over. "They're back, Richard," I said, my voice as steady and even as if I were discussing a hostile takeover bid. "And they're harassing me for money." And I gave him the condensed version of the events. The Facebook message from Ryan, the carefully staged meeting at the coffee shop, the ambush at my office, and the final, galling demand for an allowance. I spoke with the dispassionate clarity of someone presenting a case study, detailing their tactics and objectives. When I finished, there was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. "Hen, I've been waiting for this call for 13 years, Madison," he said finally, and his voice held the grim satisfaction of a patient prophecy fulfilled. They established a clear pattern of behavior long ago. Now they've been arrogant enough to continue it, thinking enough time has passed. They've given us exactly what we need. We're going to hold them accountable. Jenny, my war council, convened the next day. Step 1, Richard explained, was to gather fresh intelligence. They believe they have you on the defensive. They will press their advantage. They will call you again, he said, his eyes sharp. And when they do, you will be ready. On his advice, I downloaded a call recording software onto my phone. The laws in our state permitted single-party consent for recording, meaning I was legally in the clear. My phone, once a source of pain, was now a weapon. The calls started 2 days later, just as Richard predicted. First, it was Ryan, his voice a wheedling, manipulative whine. "I can't believe you upset Mom like that, Maddie. She's a wreck. All she wants is for us to be a family. A little help is all we're asking for." I held the phone away from my ear, listening with a kind of detached fascination. My silence a blank wall he could throw his empty words against. Every word was captured, every pathetic sigh, every guilt trip, every thinly veiled threat about what a bad daughter I was. And then came my father, trying the disappointed patriarch routine, his voice heavy with false gravitas. "I didn't raise you to be this cold, Madison. Family is supposed to take care of family." I let the recording soak up the thick, dripping hypocrisy. On step 2 was to fortify my position with allies from the past. There was only one person I could think of, my Aunt Carol, my father's sister. She was the only relative who had returned my frantic calls all those years ago. Her voice choked with a guilty sorrow she couldn't explain at the time. I found her number and dialed, my heart pounding with a different kind of anxiety now. The fear of rejection, but also the hope for validation. And when she heard my voice, she gasped, "Madison, oh my God, is it really you?" I told her everything, and the guilt she'd carried for 13 years came pouring out. "He made me promise not to tell you, Maddie," she sobbed into the phone. "Your father, he said it was the only way, that you'd be better off. He told the whole family you were a troubled kid who ran away. I knew it was a lie, and I've never forgiven myself for keeping that secret." "And will you testify to that?" I asked, my voice gentle but firm. "Will you tell a court what he did, what he told you?" "And yes," she said without a moment's hesitation, her voice suddenly fierce. It's time the truth came out. And the final step was to build the fortress. In Richard's gleaming conference room, we laid out the arsenal on the polished table. The old evidence felt like ancient, painful artifacts. There was a high-quality scan of my father's original, callous note. There were the bank statements, clearly showing my college fund being drained just 3 days before they vanished. There was a transcript of my original, panicked call to Ryan, reconstructed from my memory and my aunt's. And then there was the new evidence, the pristine, high-quality, digital recordings of their recent demands and manipulations. And finally, the sworn, notarized affidavit from my Aunt Carol, corroborating the premeditated nature of the abandonment and the subsequent smear campaign against me. And we had everything. Richard's team of sharp, young lawyers drew up the paperwork. It wasn't just a restraining order, it was a full-scale lawsuit. The charges were clear and brutal, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud, based on the argument that their entire attempt at reconciliation was a calculated scheme to extort money. Annie and I looked at the thick stack of papers, the culmination of a lifetime of injustice. My signature on the final page, in bold black ink, wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of liberation. "And they'll be served tomorrow," Richard said, stacking the documents neatly. "We've requested an expedited hearing." He looked at me, a serious, steady expression on his face. "It's time to go to court, Madison." The war had been declared. The battlefield was chosen. In the courtroom was a sterile wood-paneled box, smelling faintly of old paper and stale coffee. It was quiet, but the air was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like I could taste it, metallic, like a storm on the horizon. I sat beside Richard, my back ramrod straight, my hands clasped calmly in my lap. Across the room sat the Carters. They weren't my family anymore. They were the opposition. And their performance began the moment the judge took her seat. Their lawyer painted a masterpiece of parental sacrifice. He spoke of a family fallen on hard times, forced to make an unthinkable choice to save their precious daughter from the burden of their debt. Brenda took the stand first, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue, her voice choked with manufactured sorrow. "Hon, we did it for her," she wept, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "We knew how smart she was, how much potential she had. We couldn't let our problems drag her down. Leaving her was the hardest thing we've ever done. We just wanted her to have a better future." I watched her, a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical curiosity. Richard stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. "Hon, Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice respectful but edged with steel. "A noble sacrifice indeed. So noble, in fact, that you withdrew every last cent from Madison's college fund 3 days before you left?" He projected the bank statement onto the large screen in the courtroom. The numbers were stark and undeniable. In Brenda's face went pale. We needed it for moving expenses," she stammered. "Hon, to move without telling her where you were going?" Richard pressed. "And I suppose the text message your son sent Madison was also part of this better future?" He cued the next piece of evidence. A transcript of Ryan's words appeared on the screen, large and damning. "Bome koke hoach moi, mai kong ko trong jo. Mom and Dad have a new plan, you're not in it." And the air in the courtroom shifted. The judge's expression hardened. My Aunt Carol was next on the stand. Her testimony was quiet but devastating, as she detailed how my father had orchestrated a smear campaign, telling the entire family I was a delinquent who had run away, forcing them all into his lie. But the final nail in their coffin was Ryan. Pushed onto the stand, he was a squirming, sweating mess. He tried to stick to the script, talking about their deep regret and love for me. Richard let him talk, then approached him with a predator's calm. "And Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, "your regret is touching, but tell me, when did this overwhelming regret begin? Was it a year ago? 5 years ago?" It's been there all along," Ryan said, avoiding his eyes. "Son, has it?" Richard mused. "Or did it, perhaps, begin around 6 months ago, when you saw your sister's face in an issue of Forbes magazine?" Ryan froze. It was a direct hit. And isn't it true, Mr. Carter," Richard's voice boomed, "that you and your parents saw my client's financial success, not as a reason to be proud, but as an opportunity? Isn't it true that you came to this city, not for a family reunion, but with a detailed plan to guilt and manipulate Madison Carter into giving you money? On objection, their lawyer yelled, jumping to his feet. Ain't overruled, the judge said, her eyes fixed on Ryan. The witness will answer the question. Ryan looked from his parents to the judge, his face a mask of panic. The lie was too big to hold. Yes, he finally choked out, the word barely a whisper. We talked about how to ask her for help. The admission hung in the air, a confession that eviscerated every tear Brenda had shed, every word of sacrifice Frank had hidden behind. I saw my father's face crumble, his wife's mask of sorrow replaced by a flash of pure fury directed at her son. Their story had collapsed. And finally, the judge turned to me. Ms. Carter, do you have a statement you would like to make? Richard gave my arm a reassuring squeeze, but I didn't need it. I stood up and walked to the podium, my steps even and measured. I didn't look at the judge, I looked directly at them, at Frank, at Brenda. For the first time, I saw them not as towering figures of my childhood, but as they truly were, small, weak, and defeated. I felt a lifetime of pain and anger coalesce not into a scream, but into a chilling, absolute calm. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating through the silent courtroom. I didn't cry. Crying was for the girl they had left behind. They didn't just leave a child, they abandoned a 17-year-old girl on the day she came home with her first major accomplishment, hoping for a word of praise. They took her future, her trust, and her belief in the very concept of family. Erin and I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. And that girl is gone. Today, a 30-year-old woman stands in her place, a woman who built a life, not despite what they did, but because of it. Their cruelty was the fire that forged me. I shifted my gaze, meeting my father's eyes, then my mother's. I don't want their money. I don't want an apology. Their words are worthless. I want only one thing. I want them to disappear from my life, forever. And I sat down. The silence was profound. The judge looked down at her papers, then over her glasses at the three of them, her expression one of utter disdain. Kenny in this court has heard enough, she said, her voice like cracking ice. A permanent restraining order is granted. Frank, Brenda, and Ryan Carter are forbidden from contacting or coming within 500 yards of Madison Carter, her home or her place of business, for life. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, in light of the calculated and malicious nature of the harassment and fraud perpetrated, this court awards punitive damages to Ms. Carter. It is clear this was never about family. It was about money. Well, now you will pay for it. It was over. The gavel fell like a guillotine, severing the last toxic tie that bound me to them. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been absolute. In leaving the courthouse felt surreal. The city noise, the bright afternoon sun, the indifferent faces of people passing by, it all seemed to belong to a different world than the one I had just inhabited. Richard walked me to my car, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "You were brilliant, Madison," he said. I simply nodded, unable to summon the words to reply. Is and I drove home to my penthouse apartment, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. It was my fortress, my symbol of victory. But as I stepped inside and the heavy door clicked shut behind me, the silence that greeted me was not triumphant. It was vast and empty. And when I had expected to feel a rush of elation, a surge of pure, unadulterated joy, but it wasn't there. Instead, what washed over me was a profound and bone-deep exhaustion. It was the feeling of a soldier after a long and brutal war, or a runner after a 13-year marathon. The fight was over, the adrenaline was gone, and all that remained was the quiet ache of the aftermath. I walked over to the window and stared out at the sprawling city below, feeling strangely disconnected from the victory I had just won. In the next morning, as I was scrolling through work emails, one subject line made me freeze. "I'm sorry." It was from an email address I didn't recognize, but I knew instantly who it was from. Ryan. My finger hovered over the delete button, my first instinct to obliterate it without a second thought. But curiosity, or perhaps a need for finality, made me click it open. And the message was short. "I'm sorry, Maddie, for everything. I was weak and then I was a coward. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know." And there was no manipulation in it, no hidden agenda I could detect. For the first time, it sounded like him, a man finally stripped of his parents' influence. 13 years ago, these words would have been a healing balm. 10 years ago, they would have made me weep with relief. 5 years ago, they might have opened a door to a conversation. But today they were just words. They were an apology for a wound that had long since scarred over. The scar was a part of me now, and his regret couldn't change that. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel forgiveness. I felt nothing. I selected the email, and without a moment's hesitation, I clicked a delete .we. And that evening, Richard and the Petersons insisted on taking me to dinner at a quiet, family-run Italian restaurant. It was a place of warmth, with checkered tablecloths and the comforting smell of garlic and oregano. They were my true family, the ones who had picked me up when I was shattered, who had believed in me when I had nothing, who had sat in the front row of the courtroom, their faces a beacon of unwavering support. And wisely, they didn't talk about the trial. There were no triumphant toasts or rehashings of the day's events. Instead, Mrs. Peterson, Sarah, as she'd insisted I call her years ago, asked about a new software project I was excited about. George, her husband, told a funny story about one of his son's college antics. Richard talked about a fishing trip he was planning. They were treating it not as the end of a war, but as the beginning of peace. And as I sat there, listening to their easy laughter, a profound sense of gratitude washed over me. I had lost a family, yes, but I had also found one, a chosen family, bound not by blood, but by something far stronger, respect and unconditional love. And the next morning, I walked into my office with a new clarity. The final boundary needed to be drawn, not with emotion, but with clinical efficiency. I called my executive assistant, a sharp, discreet woman named Chloe, into my office. "And Chloe," I began, my tone calm and professional. "I need you to create a new protocol. I want you to block a list of names and all associated phone numbers, email addresses, and social media accounts from all company and personal channels. The block needs to be absolute and impenetrable." Zen and I wrote 3 names on a piece of paper and pushed it across the desk: Frank Carter, Brenda Carter, Ryan Carter. Chloe looked at the list, then at me, her expression unreadable but professional. "Of course, Ms. Carter," she said. "I'll implement it immediately." And just like that, the wall was built. It was a digital fortress, a final silent declaration that they no longer existed in my world. The victory in court had been for the public record, for justice. This final act was for me. It was the acceptance of a permanent loss, the quiet, painful acknowledgement that the door to my past was now closed and locked forever. I'm standing at my office window, looking out at the endless horizon, the question returned, but this time it was different. It was no longer a cry of despair. The war is over, the ghosts are banished. So what now? What do I do with all this freedom, this power? And the question lingered in the quiet moments that followed the storm. What do I do with all this freedom, this power? For so long my life had been defined by a fight, first for survival, then for justice. Now in the calm, I had to find a new definition. The answer didn't come in a flash of insight, but in a slow, steady realization. My pain had forged me, but it didn't have to be my only legacy. It could be a beacon for others lost in the same darkness I had once known. 6 months after the trial, I stood on a small stage in a community hall, looking out at a sea of young, anxious, and hopeful faces. These were the first recipients of scholarships from my new nonprofit organization, the Phoenix Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide financial and mentoring support for college-bound youths who had been abandoned or aged out of the foster care system. Niños, my name is Madison Carter, I began, my voice steady and warm. And like many of you, my journey began when my world fell apart. For a long time, I believed my story was about what I had lost. I thought it was about betrayal and anger. But I was wrong. I looked around the room, meeting their eyes. My story and your story is not about the fire that was meant to destroy us. It's about the fact that we can rise from the ashes. It's about what we choose to build. Your past does not define your future. Your strength does. I told them my story, not with bitterness, but with a hope that was real and hard-won. And my life found a new, gentler rhythm. The relentless drive that had built my company was now tempered with a quiet joy I was finally allowing myself to feel. I discovered the simple, profound pleasure of plunging my hands into the soil of my rooftop garden, coaxing tomato plants and basil into life under the city sun. My sprawling, silent apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of laughter during the Sunday dinners I cooked for my chosen family, the Petersons, Richard, and a close circle of friends. And one day, I walked into a local animal shelter and came home with a scruffy, one-eyed terrier mix named Buster, who had been abandoned himself. The first time he curled up at the foot of my bed and let out a contented sigh, I felt a piece of my own heart, long guarded and closed off, sigh with him. Learning to trust the unconditional love of this small, scruffy creature was a lesson in learning to trust happiness itself. One evening, I sat at my desk, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. I had one final piece of business to attend to. I took out a sheet of my best stationery and a pen, and I began to write. Into the 17-year-old girl in the empty house. On, I know you're scared. I know you feel worthless and invisible, like a ghost in your own life. I want you to listen to me. This pain you feel, this suffocating emptiness, is not the end of your story. It is the beginning. It is the pressure that will turn you into a diamond. You will be lonely. You will be exhausted. You will work harder than you ever thought possible. But you will never, ever be as weak as the people who left you. Their actions are a cage they built for themselves. Your actions will be the key that sets you free. Han, you are not ungrateful. You are not unlovable. You are a survivor, and you are so much stronger than you know. And I finished the letter, folded it, and placed it in an envelope. On it, I simply wrote, "Ewer for Madison Chungkyo." Then I opened a long, velvet-lined box that sat on my desk. Inside was a trophy. It was a beautiful, heavy thing of polished silver, with an elegant, winged figure on top. I had it custom-made. On the small brass plaque at its base, the inscription read, E. N. Madison Carter in Victor. A and I propped the letter against the trophy's base. The shattered pieces of the old one, the one that represented a desperate plea for their approval, were gone. This one, the one I had given to myself, was a testament to my own victory. And the next morning I took my coffee and went out to the rooftop garden. Buster trotted happily at my heels. The first light of dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. It was a new day. My past was not a ghost that haunted me. It was the foundation upon which I had built my life. I had taken the ugliest thing that had ever happened to me and transformed it into a legacy of hope. I was free. In thank you for listening to Madison's story. Her journey from the ashes of betrayal to a life of purpose is a powerful testament to the human spirit. Perhaps a part of her story resonated with your own, or reminded you of a time you had to draw your own line in the sand. And in your story matters. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below, creating a space of shared understanding and strength. And if this story touched you, please show your support with a like and share it with someone who might need a message of resilience today. And to join our community for more empowering stories like Madison's, please subscribe to the channel. Iksen Chakkan.